What is the greatest physical pain you've ever felt? Story 1. I had surgery to drain a fistula on my right ass cheek 8 years ago. I've got Crohn's disease. The first time they had to change the dressing for that wound was excruciating. There was gauze about 5 inches deep into the wound on my ass cheek, but since it has been in there for a day, it had began to stick to the walls of the wound. When it was taken out, they had to do it slowly, and it ripped the inside of the wound a lot. If I had to describe the pain, I'd say imagine being stabbed in the ass and then they twist the knife for about 5 minutes straight. Horrible experience. Story 2. I have birthed 3 children, all naturally, not flexing, using as an example. In comparison, the cramps I get from my period now are way more painful. I would literally rather birth all 3 of my children again over having these goddamn cramps every month. Story 3. Got 4 wisdom teeth removed and wasn't able to get the pain medication before the anesthesia wore off, courtesy of the pharmacy screwing up. That was probably the only time in my life where I genuinely wanted to die because the pain was just that bad. Most notably because 3 out of the 4 teeth had to be broken and cut out of my jaw, and I had horrible dry sockets because of it. I was absolutely immobilized from pain, and all I could do was pathetically squirm and cry in agony on the floor until someone else was able to get my meds. 0/10 wouldn't recommend. Story 4. Stepping on a Lego brick barefoot in the dead night. It's a tiny, unassuming piece of plastic, yet it unleashes a world of pain disproportionate to its size. It's like every nerve ending in your foot wakes up and screams in unison. Joke aside, that little brick packs a wallop ulmao. Story 5. A few years ago, I had a medical procedure done that's called uvulopalatopharyngoplasty, or UPPPP. The procedure consists of tonsil removal, shortening of the uvula, and shortening of the soft palate. In all of the visits leading up to the procedure, my doctor made sure to remind me how painful the recovery would be. He'd say, even with strong pain medication, you will be in a 10-10 pain for at least a week to 2 weeks. He did not lie. Even with a very strong pain medication, I was in a lot of pain and discomfort. I generally have a high pain tolerance, but the pain from the procedure brought me to tears multiple times during my recovery. I remember very vividly crying while eating a chocolate pudding just so I could take my meds. That was a low moment in my recovery, LOL. For what's it's worth, I no longer snore and have a much easier time swallowing. It was totally worth it. At time I was questioning whether or not it was, but a few years removed, I'd do it all over again for the same results. Story 6. It's hard to pick just one. Having a root canal where the numbing injection didn't take effect. Appendicitis. Mom didn't believe me for nearly 3 days before taking me to get seen. Ended up in the hospital for a month afterwards. I had a 15 centimeters tumor in my uterus that went undiagnosed for what I believe was approximately 10 years. It made periods awful, felt like someone was trying to rip me in half at the hips, severe backaches, pain that radiated from my stomach to my knees, intense cramping, etc., etc. One male doctor at the ER once said, "Oh, is someone having a bad period?" in a condescending tone. F that guy. I also live with chronic pain, so I live at about a 4-6-10 on any given day. Story 7. Probably when I got food poisoning back in high school after eating hot dogs for lunch. Worst stomach pain I've ever experienced. I literally could not walk for the rest of the day. The pain was so bad, I thought I was going to die for sure. So I wanted to accept my fate to lay in bed to die in peace, versus going to the doctor, just for the inevitable to happen anyways. That or getting strep throat. Wouldn't wish either on my worst enemy. Story 8. Getting off pain medication was even more painful than back surgery. It's absurd that people think it's harder to quit smoking than coming off of opioids and related shit. Like, no, it's not harder to quit smoking than to quit heroin. That's stupid. And yet a shocking amount of people actually believe it. Story 9. I rip off my foot on a motorcycle accident. It was still attached after, but was facing backwards. How does it felt? I felt a combo of intense burning and wearing a very tight and rigid boot that's applying way too much compression, and the feeling of a very heavy weight passing over the foot. Story 10. I got stabbed with a homemade knife while traveling in Afghanistan. Had a vlog camera out, not a YouTuber or anything, just wanted to document my time. And that seemed to have upset some locals, and a small boy no older than 12. 13 just ran up to me and started poking my legs. Really didn't understand what had happened till about 5 minutes later, as a lot of children and adults always came up to me and wanted to speak, completely friendly. So assumed it was nothing till I looked down and saw a perfect trail of blood coming from behind me. Had to go RMC Kabul, public hospital, which was absolutely wild. Story 11. When I was in elementary school, I remember during recess the bell rang and everyone on the field was walking to class, and there were these two kids behind me, and one of them was playing with a rock, and I guess he accidentally threw it and it hit me right on the shoulder bone. And I'm telling you, the pain I felt. My entire arm went numb and I couldn't move it, and the pain shot to my collarbone. I stopped walking and threw up. I'll never forget that pain. Story 12. Let's see. I've had 3 children, but that's not it. I've had kidney stones and gallstones, not it. I have daily migraines, also not it. On occasion cluster headaches, and that would be it. The most painful, except I have one other thing that tops cluster headaches only because its frequency is much more often. Have to say it's sphincter of Oddi dysfunction. When it kicks in, it can be hours at a time. I will pass out from pain and exhaustion of pain and come to still in pain. And all I can do is wait it out. The dull ache it does at times can stay for days. But when it really sets off, the worst is the hours and hours I can be in that pain and exhaustedly passing out from it. Story 13. I have had a lumbar puncture, or also known as a spinal tap, done because my neurologist suspected I had meningitis. They basically put in a very long needle in my lower back, which went through the discs and reached the spinal cord, and the needle acted like a tap, basically. And the fluid was collected drop by drop, which took fucking forever to fill in a small glass container. I almost lost my consciousness due to the weird feeling. It almost felt like I was drugged. They also missed the first time they tired puncturing, so that was awful. And then when they eventually got the needle in, I felt a zap like an electric shock kind of sensation, which made me jolt, and the doctor then went like, "Yes, we're in." I have a high pain tolerance, so I didn't scream or shout, and they all were very surprised as to how calm I was. But little did they know I was dying on the inside and plotting their murder. Good thing I didn't have meningitis, though. All went well. Story 14. I had a tissue-eating infection in one of my fingers from picking a hangnail one day. My finger grew to a size of a sausage, and my mother refused to take me to the hospital until the infection streaked up past my elbow. To this day, I have nerve damage in my elbow and finger and can feel the pain every now and then. Story 15. When I was in college, I had to have maxillofacial reconstruction, which required my jaw being wired shut for 2 months. But that was nothing compared to when, just a couple of hours before I was to be released from the hospital, a nurse decided to put an IV into the soft, meaty part of my hand at the base of my thumb. She had trouble finding the vein. My other veins on the back of my hands, etc., had blown out after 5 days, so felt like she was kind of twisting and grinding to get it. Imagine a kid with his face so swollen he looked like Eddie Murphy in Nutty Professor spitting curses out at a nurse through wired-shut teeth. Absolute torture, and that was with painkillers. Story 16. This is funny in a sad, silly way, but an ingrown hair around my groin after surgery. A few years ago, I had to go under the knife to correct a condition where my abdominal muscles were splitting. See also diastasis recti. Anyway, the procedure went 100% fine and the muscle repair worked. However, the days after when I was recovering, there were these 2 suction drainage tubes placed in my groin to collect all the abdominal fluid, blood, goo, etc. I had one ingrown hair right near my D***K that was so maliciously, cripplingly, debilitatingly painful, I collapsed and cried. I even sent pictures to my doctor thinking she nicked something very important or left a stitch in there that got infected. Turns out I was just a big baby, and the ingrown hair made my beg for mercy. Story 17. Had a biopsy on my kidney because HS drug tests, for sports, showed I had too much protein in my urine. The biopsy wasn't the problem. It wasn't fun either. A couple of days later, I feel a bit feverish and not all that great. Then the next morning, I went to go to the bathroom and felt such a horrible pain that I dropped to the floor and couldn't get up. It felt like somebody impaled me with a spear where my kidney was located. Come to find out, the doctor nicked my kidney during the biopsy, and it caused internal bleeding, and I had a blood clot around my kidney the size of a football. That pain, though, wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Story 18. In 8th grade, I played some football with friends and broke my collarbone. I thought I just dislocated my shoulder and had a friend pull and twist my arm in order to set the joint. Problem was, this completely snapped the collarbone in half and almost stabbed me in the jugular. I then grabbed my own shoulder, set the bone, and proceeded to go to the hospital. When I sent my bone, I invented about 20 new curse words in about 3 seconds. But from then on, those that saw it always gave me credit as a tough motherfucker. Second was in fact a #2. Impacted bowel is no joke. I woke up sweating in the dead of night thinking felt off. Then in a second it felt like I swallowed a honey badger and it was very upset and is attempting to burrow out. I cried. Hydrate and eat your fiber. Story 19. I unknowingly had a benign mass grow under one of my molars. When the pain hit, I had about 3 days of uncomfortable pain, 1 day of kill me pain. Then on the morning of my dentist appointment, the mass put enough pressure on the root of the molar that it cracked the tooth, and the pain sent me into orbit. Oral surgeon pulled the tooth and removed the mass, and it was about the size of a pinhead. Story 20. Amputated my ring and pinky finger of my left hand in a log splitter. If you've used one before, you know that the hydraulic cylinder cutting wedge moves very slow. I remember my fingers getting caught between the log and the back end of the cradle, then feeling the bone splinter. Then my fingers getting ripped off while in the glove and snapped backwards as it was happening slowly. I screamed. I have been stabbed, beaten badly, broken my back on a parachute accident while in the military, blown up and been in several car accidents, but that injury was the most painful and traumatic, and I remember every second of it. Story 21. I have keloids. Had 2 surgeries done. First one, I got put under anesthesia and woke up a couple hours later feeling like I just got throat fucked by the Hulk. Second time, I didn't have insurance, so I found a keloid doc that could numb both my ears and just cut the keloids off the lobe of them. First ear went fine. The second one didn't numb all the way, and me being as shy and timid back then didn't let the doctor know. Felt every motion of that blade. The thing that got me through it surprisingly was the constant cutting noise. It sounded like a zipper being done and undone. Now the worst pain in this whole process was getting steroid shots to keep my keloids down. Stopped after 3 years and looky my keloids are back and worse. Story 22. Slipped disc pressing on my nerve column. The more time went on, the longer, more intense the pain was in my lower back, radiating down one leg, until I finally went to the doctor to start the process for surgery. It got so bad that days leading up to it, I could barely walk 3-4 steps without being in complete agony. Literally, the moment after I woke up, the nerve pain that had plagued me for nearly 10 years was gone, minus pain from the surgery, which was light years easier to tolerate, and it nearly brought me to tears. Story 23. Had a spinal tap done a few years ago, which resulted in a small hole in my spinal column that started leaking spinal fluid out continuously, resulted in the pressure of fluid around my brain decreasing, and lead to the worst headache of my entire life. Saying this as someone with chronic migraine. It literally felt like my brain was touching the bottom of my skull, only went away once I went back and got a blood patch to fix the hole. Story 24. Had 4 wisdom teeth. The 2 at the bottom pushed my teeth in, and the 2 at the top one were pushing other top teeth, while the other was facing down. Infection spread all through my sinuses. I didn't have the funds to go to the dentist and was finally dealt with through public after 10 years. The pain, though, nope. Rather go through childbirth. It was like this throbbing, burning, radiating pain. Plus all I could taste was rot, and the drooling when it was particularly bad wasn't fun to deal with. Highly recommend seeing dentists aside from lack of funds. Also had a fear of them. The pain is not worth it. Story 25. When I was a freshman in high school, I thought I'd be cool in front of my friends and try to jump my bike over this area where 2 slabs on concrete in a sidewalk were pushed together. Instead of looking cool, my front tire hit the edge of one of the slabs and I went headfirst over the handlebars and landed square on my chin. Ended up dislocating my jaw and shattering it. You could put your finger in the laceration on my chin and it would come out between my bottom teeth. Jaw wired shut for 12 weeks and a lifetime of embarrassment. Story 26. Ruptured eardrums following a bad sinus ear infection. At first there was this unbearable, inescapable pressure that made me feel like a prisoner in my own head. Then they burst. Blood and pus were leaking out of my ears. I was crying, and it felt like someone had taken a piece of electrified wire and stuck it directly in one ear, through my head and out the other. In addition to the pain, there was no way for me to lie down. I only slept because my boyfriend had some leftover Vicodin from an operation he'd had years ago. For the next several weeks, my hearing was completely fucked up. The same pitch sounded different in my right and left ear, diplacusis, which gave everything and everyone a kind of Dalek sound to them. The fidelity of the sound was also worse, with everything sounding like it was coming through a cheap speaker. As a musician, this caused me an extreme amount of emotional distress. Months later, my ears still bubble and crack at odd times, but thankfully, I haven't sustained any permanent hearing damage. As a postscript, I'm non-binary, but I had only recently realized that about myself. Sitting in the urgent care without blood leaking out of my ears, thinking I was going deaf and in so much pain I was sure I could just die right then and there. In that same moment, I resolved that if I made it through, I would fully commit to my transition. Story 27. Fractured and dislocated my left elbow. It broke and then dislocated while making a T-shape at the joint. It felt like I was roasting my arm over red-hot coals for hours until I was given high dosage of painkillers and could be reset by a doctor and nurse. Resulted in swelling so bad it could not be casted, and a solid bruise that turned my arm 100% purple, then 100% black from my wrist to my shoulder. Incredible amount of pain. Story 28. I was carrying a canoe with my mom. She dropped her end and there was a rock fulcrum in the middle that popped my end up and literally lifted me onto my toes by the gooch. I kinda blacked out as I was going to take a swing at my mom in sheer pain-induced panic. Apparently I smashed the shit out of the hood of a car. I kinda came to in the fetal position in the bathroom. I reached down by my balls and came back with a bloody hand. Went to the hospital and the intake ladies kept asking me what was wrong with my eyes because I couldn't stop wincing and holding my face. Some Scottish bull nurse dude came in and exclaimed that it was obviously my balls. They gave me a shot in the ass of some crazy-ass painkiller that, ooh boy, it still hurt, but I didn't care anymore. The hit thankfully was just behind my balls, so no permanent damage, but I couldn't sit down for a couple weeks. Story 29. I was on a business trip and ate something and it got some kind of poisoning. Probably bad food anyway. I wake up with extreme diarrhea, high fever, and a stomach ache so bad it felt like someone is pinching my stomach with pliers all the time. It hurt so bad the only position that didn't hurt like a SOB was lying in bed in the fetal position. In between going to the bathroom and the pain and fever, I could not sleep more than an hour at a time. I could not tell day from night due to how messed up my sleep was. And the fever, the medications the hotel got me from a nearby pharmacy, did shit other than reduce the fever to the point I was not going to die, lasted 2 days and 3 nights. Story 30. Cluster migraine pain becomes my whole world for a week or more. Most painkillers are of limited effectiveness, and getting anything that is effective has on multiple occasions involved having to try and convince an ED doctor that I'm not an abuser looking for a fix after finding a way to get myself to hospital. Closely followed by the time I fractured a lower vertebra when I lost an argument with a huge rock that I fell onto my back on. Followed by the time I broke my sternum in a car accident, steering wheel impact in a vehicle made before airbags became compulsory here. Story 31. Waking up after my appendectomy, which was a bit more complicated than normal due to the appendix playing hide-and-seek, and being very insistently encouraged by the nurse and my mom, who's also a nurse, to get up out of bed and use the restroom. I legitimately thought I was going to pass out from the pain. Thankfully, by the time I made it back into the hospital bed, they shot me up with morphine, like a lot of morphine. It really helped me understand why people get hooked on it because wow. Story 32. Have always had frequent tonsil adenoid gland issues. When it's real bad, my throat starts to close up. At that point, they need to be drained. One instance, I am at the ENT doctor's office, go in to see one of the doctors. I'm in kind of a dentist's chair, they recline me back. Open up wide for a nice big old needle to drain as best they can. Usually doesn't take much, but this time, they weren't hitting the mark. No puss coming out. They keep jabbing, moving this needle around while it's in my throat. I'm squeezing the life out of this poor nurse's hand next to me. I start to get tunnel vision, closest I've ever been to passing out from pain. I'm exhausted thinking about it. It sucked a lot.